whenever you go get a tarot reading, what the story of the tarot and like the creation of narratives is like. And then I'm going to kind of break down these elements from a cognitive psychology perspective and let you know kind of where my thinking is on the tarot and how our minds really love this deck of cards and how it really works for us. So, the tarot is quite old. If you've spent any time in metaphysical or occult circles, there is a bit of a rumor that, or I guess lore, that the tarot is originally a ancient Egyptian book of magic that's been transformed into a deck of tarot cards. This is not terribly accurate. The earliest recordings we have of the tarot come from the 15th century in Italy. And this is where we also see the origins of playing cards. And so from this like prototype deck, we start to see divergent versions of decks of cards coming out. One of which is the tarot. The other one is going to be your like bicycle Texas Hold'em poker deck. So they're cousins. And the tarot was used as a playing card deck during this time with the Italian elite. And then as it dispersed over Europe, we then start to see the occult associations forming in the 17th century in France. And this is where we also start to get the lore around the tarot being from ancient Egypt. From the 17th century, we get to the 19th century in the United Kingdom, where we start to see formalized esoteric knowledge about the tarot. So I'm thinking primarily of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which took the tarot and transformed it into kind of a closed system of magical practice that has associations with numerology, astrology, and Kabbalah. From there into the US, we see a rise in the tarot's popularity with New Age movements from the 1960s and 70s. It becomes less associated with magic and more associated with things like self-actualization, peak experiences, and improving your well-being. And then as we move into the digital age, we see widespread commodification and popularity of the deck. There are several TikTok influencers who the only thing they do online is they do generic tarot readings for massive audiences. There is a widespread market explosion in terms of different kinds of tarot decks that have been developed. And there are Etsy sellers and blogs and vlogs and Instagram pages galore of tarot readers who give both the esoteric and occult knowledge from the past, but primarily they situate within this very much mindfulness, self-actualizing, personal growth kind of sphere. Some of the major thinkers and influences on the tarot. So we have Antoine Court de Gibbon, who was the original writer of occult tarot. So this is my 15th or 17th century reference here. You see here Pamela Coleman Smith and A.E. Waite. They developed probably, we'll call it the most popular tarot card deck, the Rider-Waite tarot deck. I have Dion Fortune here, who really moved the tarot into Kabbalah spaces. So for those unfamiliar, Kabbalah is Jewish mysticism. Up in the right-hand corner is Sally Nichols, who took the tarot in the 1980s and applied it to Jungian psychoanalysis, so the psychology of Carl Jung. And then below that, we have Alejandro Jodorowsky, the filmmaker, for those of you who've seen his films like The Holy Mountain or El Topo. Also very much into the tarot. He wrote a massive volume on the tarot and reconstructed what he believes to be the early French version of the deck, the Tarot de Marseille. Well, there we go. So the cards typically have 76 cards in them, and they're split into two subdecks, the Major Arcana and the Minor Arcana. The Major Arcana are called the Major Secrets, and these are plot devices within the deck. So these are things that are associated with astrology, big picture stuff, any sort of cosmic influence on the reader's life. While the Minor Arcana is called the Minor Secrets, and these are the mundane life details. So these are the, will I get a boyfriend? Or What's going on with my job? Does my boss hate me? Or I can't seem to get out of writer's block. The minor arcana typically deals with those kinds of things, while the major arcana is like life purpose stuff. The deck has changed quite a bit over time. So I have a sampling of some of the lover cards from across time. So in 1441, over here on the left-hand side, we have L'Amour, which was actually a wedding gift for the Duke of Milan. So that is him and his bride. And this is back when the tarot was just a playing card set. Um, to the right, I have Alejandro Jodorowsky's reconstruction of what the 1760 tarot deck might have looked like in France. Our center deck right here is from the Rider-Waite. So this is from Pamela Colin Smith's illustration. And most tarot decks today are based on this Rider-Waite deck. So typically you'll see art changing, but the mechanics stay the same within the deck. Next to the right, we have the Lover's card from Aleister Crowley's deck. And then in a more contemporary example, we have the Nightmare Before Christmas deck of the Lover's card. And so even though the card has changed cultural context over time, so we see this very highbrow, upper class Italian style over here on the left. And then we have our bit more pop culture-y Nightmare Before Christmas card on the right. The general meaning of the tarot has stayed the same and has persisted over these centuries. So if you want to get a tarot reading, how does this process go? So typically with a tarot reading, you start with a question. The question can be something as basic as, what am I going to do next week? It could also be a little bit more involved, like, hey, what's my, 5-year plan? Or what kind of job am I going to get after I finish my degree? Lots of people use tarot for love readings. So what's going on with my relationship? When am I going to get a boyfriend, etc. The tarot reader will then create a spread or choose a spread. This is a spatial arrangement of cards that they will lay out. They'll shuffle the deck and lay them out in that predetermined arrangement and then proceed with the reading or the interpretation process. If you want to get the most out of a tarot reading, it's best not to ask yes or no questions or questions that have a forced binary response. And so questions like, does my crush like me? Will I get a job after school? Will my art start becoming profitable? These are all for forced choice answers, and they don't quite lend themselves to the tarot reading process. There are tarot readers who do have ways of answering yes or no questions with the cards, but typically you want to have a little bit more of a open-ended question and to get the most out of a reading. So instead of does my crush like me, maybe ask how does my crush feel about me? How do I prepare for the job market? What draws people to my art? And that will give the tarot more room to explore these themes within your actual question. If you get curious at the end of this talk and you want to go to a tarot reader and ask some questions of them, you can just get a general reading. So if you don't have anything specific in mind, you can just say, I'd just like a general reading about the future, maybe. And the tarot reader will know exactly what to do with that. I'll also note, and I'll explain this later in the talk, you also don't need to actually verbalize your question to the tarot reader. The cards, because the system of the cards works in such a way, you don't necessarily need the tarot reader to know everything about you or your business in order to receive a successful reading. So a lot of people may feel like, oh, I have to tell the tarot reader every single intimate detail about my school life and what kind of job I want after college and who I've been talking to and what recruiters have reached out. The tarot reader does not need to know all of this information. I mentioned spreads. So here's a sampling of spreads that you might come into contact with a tarot reading. So you have your basic 3-card spreads. Usually this is a past, present, future reading. The tarot reader will draw 3 cards, put them in this arrangement, and read the cards based off of their spatial location. You can also get more complex, like this center tarot spread. I believe this is called the English spread. And then towards the right, we have the Celtic Cross, which is also incredibly popular. And each spread is designed to tap into a specific aspect of a problem. And so typically a tarot reader will be flexible with the kind of spreads that they choose depending on the kinds of questions that they get. So you may go to the same tarot reader several times with different questions, and each question may result with a different sort of spatial arrangement of the cards that they're pulling. Now, there is a bit of a ritual when it comes to dealing the cards and how you shuffle. I would say that this is different between tarot readers, like drastically. So some tarot readers will have some sort of ritual to start a tarot reading. They may, if they're particularly religious, they may offer up a prayer. They may do a guided meditation. They may have you hold different crystals to change your energy in the space. They may do some sort of shorthand Reiki session with you ahead of time. It all kind of depends on the specific religious orientation and spiritual orientation of the reader. Their shuffling styles will be different. So some of them will shuffle like they're playing poker. Some will do an overhand shuffle. Some of them will dump the cards out on the table and just mix master them around with their hands. They may pick cards for you. They may have you pick the cards yourselves. They may deal them face down and then turn them up over the course of the reading, or they may just deal them face up through the at the initial get-go to get a more holistic picture of what's going on. I would say in general, the method doesn't matter, but consistency does. And we'll get back to this when I talk about biases and automatic processing here in a little bit later. So you asked your question. The tarot reader did their ritual. They've laid the cards out in a specific spread, and now they're going to give you an interpretation. And so a really good tarot reader will create a story based off of the cards that they're seeing. And so there's a couple layers to this. So the first thing to note is each individual card has a specific meaning. That card in a specific place within a spread will change that meaning. And then that card in that place next to other cards will also influence that meaning. And then it all gets funneled through the question that you asked. And so there's multiple layers of interpretation and contingencies going on with the tarot reading that require both a solid foundation of just rote memorization of the card meanings, but also the flexibility in order to change and adapt that meaning depending on the question, depending on the location, and depending on the card's neighbors next to them. And so if you get a good tarot reader, let's say that you've started reading tarot for about a year now, you are glued to that little manual that comes with your tarot deck, and they pull a card and they give you an interpretation of that card that is just slightly different than the little pamphlet that came with the deck tells you, you're working with a good reader because they're adapting that card in order to meet the circumstances of your question and of that particular reading. So let's do an example. So let's say you go to a tarot reader and you say, I can't keep my house clean. It's the middle of the semester, midterms is going on, my dishes are piling up, I haven't done laundry in 2 weeks, like my cat is shedding all over the house, like my life is a disaster right now. What's going on? How do I get back into the swing of things? And the tarot reader says, okay, well, let's take a look at what the cards say. And they draw 3 cards for you, and you get the 4 of Wands, Justice, and then the 8 of Pentacles. And so just as a general interpretation of these cards, I would say that you are having issues with work-life balance and that you're spending way too much time at work, you're not setting enough boundaries at work, and that your home life is suffering because of that. Now, you might go, well, I work in higher education. Of course, I'm putting a lot of work into my job right now. It's midterms week, it's homecoming week, like we're all scrambling. And at which the tarot reader is going to tell you, well, the Justice card tells us not to just be fair and just to other people, but also to be fair and just to ourselves, and that you should practice some kindness and some understanding on yourself and don't unnecessarily stress yourself out about the dishes right now. Wait till finals midterms week is over, wait till homecoming's over, and then get back on the bandwagon and, be honest and kind to yourself in this process. And so that's kind of what, if I were reading the tarot for this mythical person that probably everyone on the Zoom call relates to right now, that is kind of what I would come up with. And what I like about the tarot, and kind of I'll give you the under the hood of what's going on here, is that the tarot, whenever you situate cards in this way, they create a semantic network. And so a semantic network is a knowledge structure that we all have in our minds. So cognitively, the way that we remember details, the way that we remember information, um, we store it in our memory in a connected network. And so one particular memory gets built against another memory, and they form a web of ideas that stretch out and connect several pieces together. For education folks, if you're familiar with the term scaffolding, scaffolding works because we're taking the pre-existing knowledge structure and we're adding things to it, right? And so the tarot works in the same way. So each card has particular associations, and whenever you do the reading, the person receiving the reading is taking those interpretations and connecting it to their semantic memory in order to create meaning. And so these are two of the cards that I just showed you right here. And we see in the middle that they connect over a massive amount of work, a lot of multitasking, things kind of falling apart at the moment right now, right? And so that is where the meaning is then generated. And so this is why you don't need to necessarily give the tarot reader all of your business, because each card in this deck is kind of like a unit of an idea that will prime your own memory of what's going on in your life and help you organize your experiences in a way that makes sense. And so while you might be sitting here on Monday stressing out about laundry, the tarot reading reminds you, hey, you have multiple responsibilities at your job right now, and you have multiple responsibilities at home right now, and things are getting out of whack at the moment. And so be kind to yourself about your laundry. And so at the very base, the tarot cards will create meaning on their own. You don't necessarily need to be too confessional with your tarot reader. The tarot reader doesn't even necessarily need to be that good. Because if you have those units of knowledge available to you, you can scaffold meaning out of pretty much any reading. Now, there are some other things at play within the tarot reading, not just our semantic networks. So there is a concept in cognitive psychology that distinguishes between automatic and controlled processing. Y'all experience this every single day of your life. Automatic processing is when you go on autopilot and you are not micromanaging your existence. Controlled processing is when you have to buckle down and you have to exert a lot of attentional control in order to make sure that you do a good job at whatever task is in front of you. And so you can think of kind of the 16-year-old who's learning to drive and the 40-year-old who's been driving for 20 years, right? The 16-year-old who's learning to drive is going to be checking their mirrors at intervals. They're going to be neurotically checking their speed limit. They're going to be adjusting their foot pressure aggressively. And it's going to be an overwhelming experience. They're probably going to be pretty stressed out driving in Albuquerque. Whereas the 40-year-old is going to turn on their tunes. They're going to go look off down I-25. They're going to be checking their mirrors. They're going to be checking their speedometer, but they're not going to be consciously aware of this process. And, 20 miles down the road, they're going to like have a moment of self-reflection where they go, oh, I haven't been paying attention to the road, right? And then you realize that you've been in fully automatic processing at that point. Now, a tarot reader will take advantage of your automatic processing because there's so much going on with the cards that they are going to rely on you kind of getting too much information and your cognition to shut down, basically. And so from this place, they can then guide you through the reading. So there's a couple biases and heuristics that they rely on. So the first one is anchoring. So anchoring is the idea that the first piece of information you receive is going to influence the rest of the information that you receive. And so if the first card that gets pulled feels really spot on and true to you and your experience, you're going to interpret the rest of that reading through that lens. The Barnum effect is very popular with astrology, as well as some personality measures like the Myers-Briggs or the Enneagram, where front of you and the tarot reader is like, hey, I'm going to make this make sense. You're going to trust them because we do not like disorganization or chaos. Consistency bias. This is the idea that we want to believe that we are consistent human beings throughout our whole lives, and we've always held the same opinions since the day we were born. And so we are more generous in interpreting the past and guesstimating the future in a way that is consistent with how we are and how we feel today. So when the tarot reader tells you about the future and you're going, yeah, yeah, no, I would totally do that. Absolutely. You're basically following for consistency bias there. The bias of transparency is the idea that we think other people know our thoughts and that we're more explicit than we actually are. And this plays out in the tarot because as the tarot reader tells you what's going on in your rich inner life, you're more likely to agree with them because it confirms that transparency bias for you. All right, so conclusion. The tarot is old. It's not ancient Egyptian old. It lends itself to storytelling. The ritual is important, and our cognitive system loves tarot. So if you pull nothing away from this talk today, I would like you to think about the tarot as a way to externalize our internal lives. The tarot does not have to necessarily rely on the ooky spooky in order to be accurate because it really plays to the way in which that we learn and that we remember our life details. And what it basically does is it externalizes all of those experiences that we have and organizes them into a system that we can better create meaning from. And so if you are ooky spooky and you love the tarot, like you know that there is a lot of the tarot that rings true most of the time. Even a bad reading, people come away with something new to reflect on. And that, it doesn't necessarily need to be something that is terribly scary in order to be helpful. I would like to thank my graduate student, Maggie Crow, who has been on this tarot journey with me for the last 2 years. We currently have 2 articles under review. In one, we found that doing tarot readings once a week improves overall well-being over time. And then the second one, which we just submitted, is that paranormal belief doesn't matter to have a positive experience with tarot. So you don't have to necessarily believe in witchcraft in order to, or even astrology, in order to get something out of tarot. And that was a very exciting finding for us. And if you like this talk and you want to learn more, I am doing a winter session this December on the psychology of tarot, where I basically turn this PowerPoint into a whole class. So with that, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate y'all watching, and I will stand for any questions that you have.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks. That was fascinating.
Thank you.
I do have a question, if you said this and I missed it, I apologize, but how does it overlap with astrology? Can tarot work together? Does it enhance, or is it completely a separate system?
So yes, they are super related. That is the short answer. The long answer is that back in the early 1900s, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn really reimagined tarot from that original Tarot de Marseille deck in order to really integrate it in with astrology. And so all of the major arcana cards like the Hermit, the Lovers, the Empress, these all have associations with either the zodiac signs or planetary bodies. And so when you're doing a reading and your tarot reader is focused on that or has some education in astrology, they'll usually start to point out astrological associations that are going on with your tarot reading.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Dr. Brooks? while people are thinking about their questions, I do want to call attention to the fact that we've got some awesome sign language interpreters. And these
Absolutely.
are students that are here facilitated by Professor Carol Litherland, and I think they're mostly UNM students, so we're happy to have them joining us today.
Yes, thank y'all so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, so everybody knows their future and they don't want to they don't have any questions for Dr. Brooks.
I had a quick question, Dr. Brooks. This is Crystal. How do you know that for sure when you're going to see a tarot reader that they are certified and know what they're talking about? Because I know that industry, a lot of people fear, like I think of the back in the day, the calls, right? Cleo, or like, how do you know for sure you're talking to a legit person who knows, who has some history or some education in it?
Um, you don't. It's kind of like life coaching. It's the Wild West out there. I would say for people who want to have a positive reading experience, it kind of depends on what you want. So if you want the ooky spooky, if it's like Halloween and you and your friends are like out on the town and you see a tarot reader who's like, I can contact the dead. Ooh, like just know that you're paying $15-20 for a fun experience and that's it. If you see someone who's like, hey, I use the tarot to help you strategize your 5-year plan and like what your long-term goals are, and they like talk about tarot as if it's some sort of like scaffolding device that actually will like, service kind of like a pseudo professional development. If that's what you're looking for, then definitely go for that person. But I think kind of having clear, you can usually tell from their websites or their Instagram pages what kind of orientation they are. If they're kind of like the new age person with like lots of crystals and like images of dolphins, you're like, okay, this is like this person like peaked in the 1980s. Or if it's like really ooky spooky, or if it looks like their Instagram is a LinkedIn page, then you kind of get a sense of what you're getting. The tarot is really flexible, and tarot readers are incredibly diverse in their approaches to reading. So it's really a case by case basis. I don't quite have a shorthand for you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Brooks?
This is Jeff. I have a question.
Go for it.
How did you get into tarot yourself?
So so when I was an undergraduate, I bought my first tarot deck on eBay because I was like, what's this about? And I really enjoyed learning the closed system. So like Julie's question suggested, there are multiple layers within this system. And so it's almost like learning math because like each time you learn a little bit, it like opens up a whole new set of like knowledge, and then next thing you know you're reading like 1800s occult philosophy. And so tarot paralleled with my education in psychology, both like as a hobby, and then in the last 2 years of those two paths have finally merged.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see. I have one in the chat. What is your current research focused on around tarot? Yeah. So, like I said, I have 2 articles under review right now. One of them looked at well-being over time. So we had a group of people read their own tarot for 6 weeks, and we measured their depression, anxiety, and like sense of control over their lives during that time. And we found that over time that these aspects tend to go down, but sense of control over your life went up. We also tested the hypothesis that you had to be like a paranormal enthusiast in order to like tarot or get something out of tarot. And so with 67 participants who were surveyed immediately after a tarot reading, it didn't matter what their prior beliefs were. They all found some sort of meaning or helpfulness in their tarot reading, which I thought was really cool. My graduate student right now is working on a couple studies looking at kind of how tarot influences identity development, and how identifying with the deck influences how you perceive that reading to be helpful or accurate. And so we're kind of getting into the mechanics of the tarot reading experience and how that changes the way that we think about ourselves and our memories and our issues, things like that.
I think Dr. Christensen has a question.
Yes.
So how much training are you giving these people in order to have them successfully read their own tarot? Because I would think that if they don't have training, they might lead to some false readings or something.
Well, I mean, it's tarot. I think I don't think it necessarily matters how accurate the reading is per se. But we did limit the number of cards that they were allowed to use for the study. So we kept it just to the 22 major arcana cards in order so that way they didn't get overwhelmed with all 76. And then kind of what would you say, the incentive to stay in the study, we gave them the minor arcana at the conclusion of the study for a full deck. So we gave them a brief overview of what the cards were. We sent them home with a packet, and then we tracked their interpretations over the 6 weeks with just those 22 cards. Thank you.
This is
Doctor-
Jeff. I have a follow-up question. Oh,
Go for it.
so I'm curious if you think you would have the same results or similar results if you used another method such as runes or I don't know, other methods of sort of prediction and self-reflection.
I think runes would probably be analogous. I think the self-reflection bit is the key, though. So any sort of device that forces you to self-reflect on your own life, I think that is what is driving the results, not necessarily the tarot as a unique tool, if that makes sense. And so if we were to give like mindfulness journaling, or trying to think what else could it be? Well, we'll just stick with mindfulness journaling, runes, tarot, anything like that that promotes self-reflection and thinking about the past and the present and the future of your own life. I think we would see the same results, which is kind of the point of the research, is that tarot is not necessarily like a uniquely spooky thing to experience in order to get something out of it. Like, I think largely due to the New Age movement, it has become rather secular.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what I was curious about. If it was more the journey than the actual vehicle to analyze that in your self-reflection.
Yeah. No, I definitely think that.
Dr. Khalsa, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, Dr. Brooke, thank you for your presentation. I was just curious, what kind of publications would you get your research published in?
So one of the articles is under review in the Journal of Psychology and Spirituality, or maybe the Journal of Spirituality. And then the other one, the one that showed that there was no relationship between the paranormal and the perceiving the tarot reading as accurate or helpful. I actually put that one in a journal called the Journal for Articles in Support of the Null Hypothesis, because I did get null results that were meaningful. And I was like, perfect, we have meaningful null results. So it's out to the reviewers right now. So we'll see if they like it. But I did do like my power analysis and everything beforehand. So fingers crossed.
Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy says in the chat that regular playing cards work well. Absolutely. If you have just a bicycle deck of cards and you want to experiment reading your own cards and you don't want to buy a $20 tarot deck, go for it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Brooks, again. This has been really fascinating. And, you know, we got to explore a new topic that probably a lot of us haven't thought of too much before. So that's what all these HU talks are all about. So I appreciate you bringing this to us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate y'all having me, and I hope y'all have a wonderful rest of homecoming and a happy Halloween.
Yay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for our next HU Talk coming up at 11 o'clock. It is going to be a talk with Miss Ruth Miriam Polsky, how to read a Supreme Court case.